I'd like to introduce Dr. Burchin Unel. She's a fellow at the Institute for Policy Integrity, an adjunct assistant professor of public service at the NYU Wagner Graduate School of Public Service. Her areas of interest include applied economics, utility organization and regulation, and health and environmental economics and policy. Her work on the economic implications of policy decisions includes considerations of social welfare in environmental and energy policies. She has previously held faculty positions at Boğaziçi University in Turkey, the University of Florida, and the City College of New York. She received her BA in economics from Boğaziçi University and PhD in economics from the University of Florida. Thank you.
Again, one more time, we're very excited to be hosting this forum. We are very interested in electricity pricing and valuing resources properly. So we're very happy that you are all here. So when we were putting this forum together, we want to make this as informative as possible. So when we were thinking about this, as you know, Richard Kaufman said and Dr. Furki mentioned, time-varying pricing is not new. It has been implemented in many places, both within the United States and across the globe. So we wanted to look at these different jurisdictions, and we wanted to learn lessons from them. So that is the goal of our first session. In our first session, we're going to have 3 speakers who have worked on implementing different versions of time-varying prices, and we're going to ask them about their experience and the lessons they learned from their experience. So to that extent, first I would like to invite Dr. Stephen George. He is Senior Vice President of Utility Services at Nexent. At Nexent, he provides expertise to electric and gas utilities and regulators on the topics of pricing strategy, demand response market analysis, and demand-side management program design and evaluation. Additionally, he directs Nexent's U.S. utility projects involving the design and evaluation of time-varying pricing pilots. And as a member of the Department of Energy, Lawrence Berkeley National Labs, he has worked with utilities to oversee pilot studies of time-varying rates, including Sacramento Municipal Utility District pilot, which he will be discussing today. He also has co-authored numerous reports on impacts of demand response and time-varying pricing. So, Dr. Stephen George. Our next panelist is going to be Wayne Harbaugh. He is the Director of Pricing and Regulatory Services at Baltimore Gas and Electric. He serves as the company's liaison for electric and gas with the Maryland Public Service Commission and is an executive sponsor of BGE's Smart Grid project. Mr. Harbaugh has responsibility for electric and gas pricing, load research, and class cost of service studies. He has served as chair of Edison Electric Institute's Rate and Regulatory Affairs Committee and is currently on the board of directors of the Association for Demand Response and Smart Grid, the Maryland DC Utility Association, and the Critical Consumer Issues Forum. Wayne Harbaugh. And finally, we are going to have David Becker. He is the Director of Dynamic Pricing at Elevate Energy, where he oversees Ameren Illinois' Power Smart Pricing Program and ComEd's Real-Time Pricing Program, which he will be discussing today. He helped lead ComEd and Ameren to success with load pricing programs, which are now the 2 largest residential hourly electricity programs in the country. His focus on the customer experiences built into the programs he directs, which in addition to time-varying pricing initiatives include call center design, implementation, and supervision for energy efficiency programs. In terms of the format of the session, we're going to hear from our panelists for 20 minutes, and then we're going to take questions, first from a Q&A panel. We wanted to invite different stakeholders to have the opportunity to ask questions, and then we're going to have questions from the audience. So if you want to ask questions, again, please write it on the cards, and we will be collecting them and asking them at the end.
first?
Stephen?
I do.
Which one?
This one up there. Yeah, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. See if I can get this right. I'm glad Amon told me that there's a computer up here. I was wondering the same thing. Unfortunately, the people in the back can't see the slides too well, but I'll try to point out the main points of each slide. So I am going to talk about the SMUD pilot. As somebody that's worked in the industry for almost 40 years, it was a real pleasure to kind of get the opportunity to evaluate this pilot, which I think is one of the best ones that's ever been done in the industry. And I can say that because I didn't design it, but I got to evaluate it. So it was a really well-done pilot. It was one of the 11 consumer behavior studies that were funded by DOE under the ARRA funding. One of the largest pilots done in the industry. And what made it so interesting, and I'll talk quite a bit about this, is it was the first one that really side-by-side included both default and opt-in tariffs of exactly the same type. So it's the first opportunity to really compare on a side-by-side basis what the impacts are under default and opt-in pilots, as well as what the acceptance rates and attrition rates were. So it's quite an interesting study for the industry. They did a lot of market research on how to present and educate customers about time use price, and I'll talk about that a little bit. I think that was a part of their success in getting good enrollment rates for opt-in. They did have interval meters in place for at least a year before customers were placed on the rates, which made it very helpful from the standpoint of doing the evaluation impact estimation. I'll be up here for 15 minutes talking about a 2-year study that has 2 very lengthy reports. I've put down a link to where you can read those. There's a lot more detail that can be found in those reports. Hopefully our friend's going to fix the feedback here. So the overall design of the pilot, the key elements of the pilot, as I said, it was they had both a default track and an opt-in track. It was a randomized controlled trial using recruit and delay for the opt-in track, randomized encouragement design for the nerds in the room on the default track. They tested both time of use and critical peak pricing, as well as a combination rate of time of use and critical peak pricing on the default side. On the opt-in side, they offered critical peak pricing to one group of customers and time of use pricing to another group of customers. And they also had 2 test cells where, as part of the recruitment, customers were offered an in-home display to encourage recruitment, and another group was not, so you can compare whether the in-home display led to higher acceptance rates of the time use rates. So that's the basic design. A little shot of what the rates look like. SMUD's standard tariff is a 2-tier increasing block rate, with the first tier about 10 cents and the second tier about 18 cents. And then the 3 different rate options, the time of use had a peak period price of about 27 cents. The critical peak price had a peak period price of around 75 cents, so a hearty price signal. And let's talk about results. So first I'm going to talk about the enrollment rates. And each of these slides will kind of be similar, and it's hard to see with the small numbers, but working left to right is the, and this first slide is about the opt-in group. I'll have a second slide on the default group. So for the opt-in tariff tests, there was a critical peak pricing without the offer of the in-home display as part of the enrollment package. The second set of bars is critical peak pricing with the offer of an in-home display. Then TOU without the in-home display and TOU with the in-home display. So that's the 4 sets of bars going across. The dark bar on each set is the acceptance rate, and they're all roughly about the same in the 18% category. There's some variation, but the first one is about 19% for critical peak pricing without in-home display, about 18% with the in-home display offer. The big conclusions here is there was a good enrollment rate by industry standards. This was all occurred within one marketing campaign, so it was 1 year, not even a year. I think recruitment started in October. The rates went into effect in June, so that was the period of time of enrolling customers on an opt-in basis. And they had a good acceptance rate. That's a great result by industry standards. Very often you'll see these kinds of rates with a few percent of customers enrolling. The next 3 bars in each case is the overall attrition rate, which is high, but nearly all of that is due to customers moving. The dropout rate, so once customers went on it, and over the 2 years of the pilot, the dropout rates were in the 5 to 10% range. So customers that actively left the rate rather than moved and were taken off the rate. And importantly, the offer of the in-home display didn't move the needle at all on customer acceptance. So offering that enabling technology, if you think of that way, it was an information feedback device, didn't change acceptance rates at all. So now on the default side, so customers were sent a letter from SMUD and said, your rate is going to change on June 1st unless you opt out. And so they were defaulted onto these rates. Again, the same order. We have critical peak pricing as the first set of bars, time of use is the second set of bars, and then time of use CPP rate is the third set of bars. And customers could call up SMUD and say, don't put me on this rate. Only about 2 to 7% of customers opted out before they were placed on the rate. Much lower than was expected. SMUD thought it could be as high as 50%. They geared up their call center for all these calls that never occurred. So 2 to 7% of customers opted out before going on the rate. And then the dropout rates over the next 2 summers were comparable to the opt-in tariff. In fact, they were a little bit lower than the opt-in tariff. The dropout rates were 4 to 8% over 2 summers. So very high enrollment. Now, there's a couple of reasons. We did some surveys. We found that about 25% of customers claimed they didn't realize they had been put on the rate. Another 25% said they didn't know they could opt out. So, that's the, some would say the beauty of default nudge. Others would say the curse of it. But the bottom line is, and you'll see some survey results later, customers, even those that didn't know they could opt out, were generally satisfied being on the rate. And as a group, this group of complacent customers that didn't opt in and didn't opt out, they still delivered demand reduction on average. Obviously, the ones that didn't know they were on the rate didn't, but on average, they still delivered demand reductions. Okay, a lot of people ask, how did SMUD get such good acceptance rates for these rates? And I think part of it is they worked hard at it. They did a lot of market research. They did something like 25 focus groups. They did surveys. They talked to 2,000 customers and trying to come up with what should we call these rates, how should we message the benefits of the rates and stuff. And I think they did a very good job with that. And I loved their naming. They had these pricing plans, and they got the cute little girl on the lawn here. But they called one of the rates their off-peak discount plan. The other one was the summer weekday value plan. So things like, words like discount and value and things like that, I think, really connote a much better possible benefits than what a lot of utilities call these rates, critical peak pricing. That's kind of a scary thought. Or just plain old time of use pricing. What's that all about, But, the summer weekday value plan, that kind of resonates. I think, part of it, is are they lucky or are they good? I think they were a little bit of both. I think they did a great job in the naming of the plans and the messaging of the plans, the research they did. But they also have a well-educated population in Sacramento, reasonable, homogeneous population, and they love their utility. I mean, SMUD is liked by their customers. Not every utility can make that claim. So I think they had the benefit of the doubt that if somebody's offering me something or putting me on a new rate, maybe it's a good thing for me, and I ought to at least try it out. So there's a little bit of lucky, a little bit of good, but I think the low opt-out rates and the high acceptance rates are pretty dramatic and beneficial from getting demand reduction. Okay, now I'm going to talk about what the load impacts are. I talked about the acceptance rates. Let's talk about what people did in response to these tariffs. And again, it's the same kind of order. On the left, we have the opt-in time of use. So these are all the time of use rates. The next slide will show the critical peak pricing rates. On time of use, there's the opt-in without an IHD offer group. The next one is a TOU with an IHD offer. Then default TOU. And all the default rates had the IHD offer. So they didn't not offer that to the default customers. So the third bar is default TOU, and then the last one is TOU CPP. So the overall results, for those of you in the back of the room, the percentages, time of use with no IHD offer was about a 10% peak reduction on the average weekday during the summer. This is with no enabling technology or anything like that, so about a 10% reduction. The group with the IHD offer was about 12%, but we looked very closely at this, and we don't think that differential is due to people getting the information from the in-home display. It was more of a selection effect going on there when you kind of looked under the hood. So our conclusion was that the in-home display did not move the needle in terms of the overall demand reduction, nor did it move the needle with respect to enrollment rates. So it was just an expensive technology that didn't seem to do much in terms of changing customer behavior in this instance. The default reductions for the time of use was about 6%, 5.8%, and for the default TOU CPP group, it was about 8.7, almost 9%. So this is all without technology. Opt-in was higher than default, but a 10% effect for a time of use rate is a pretty good result. Now, with the higher price signal associated with critical peak pricing, that's what's shown here. Again, we got the opt-in on the left and the default on the right. Here we're seeing 21% average demand reduction on event days for the opt-in CPP with no IHD offer, almost 25% for the group that received the IHD offer. And then on the default side, it was about 14% and about 12% for default. The first one was critical peak pricing alone, and the second one is the combination of TOU and CPP. So again, good results, no technology involved, just people doing stuff. Okay, there's always a question about what about low-income consumers? How do they respond to these rates? In SMUD, there's a tariff called EPR. I don't remember what it stands for, but it's a qualifying, low-income qualifying rate. You get a big rate discount if you don't exceed certain low-income standards. And in this instance, and we haven't seen this everywhere, but in this instance, the average reduction for customers on the EPR rate was about the same as for customers that were not on the low-income rate. And interestingly, the acceptance rate was higher for customers on the low-income rate than for the non-low-income customers, and the dropout rate for default customers was lower. So in this instance, low-income customers enrolled at a higher rate, dropped out at a lower rate, and gave you about the same amount of demand reduction as non-low-income customers. Okay, putting the higher enrollment rate from default together with the impacts, the default customers' average impacts were lower, but the enrollment rates were 4 to 5 times higher. So the overall aggregate reduction from a default tariff relative to the opt-in tariff was about 3 times larger. This is a simulation where we assume that, if SMUD offered to 100,000 customers these different options on a default or an opt-in basis, and given the acceptance rates that we saw in the pilot and the impacts that we saw in the pilot, what would the overall aggregate reductions be? So what we see here is that on an opt-in basis, it was about 11.6 megawatts, and on a default basis, it's almost 3 times that, almost 35 megawatts for the critical peak pricing tariff. For the TOU tariff on an average weekday, again, about a factor of 3.7 megawatts versus about 11 megawatts. And then the TOU rate on an event day, what you see with demand reductions of time varying rates is that you tend to get larger absolute reductions on hotter days because people use more load. And so the the comparison between the critical peak pricing and the TOU, you have to kind of do it on the same set of days to get an apples-to-apples comparison. And that's the last set of bars on the right. So that was about 5.6 for the opt-in and almost 15 megawatts for the default rate. So just a few more slides. So that's the basic empirical results. We also did a survey at the end of the pilot and asked some questions about customers' perceptions about the rates, the fairness of the rates, satisfaction with the rates, things like that. And some very interesting findings. Oh, one more slide, cost effectiveness. So we did some analysis after the fact, again, assuming the enrollment rates and the impacts that we observed in the pilot and the costs of marketing on an opt-in basis and education on an opt-out basis. What would the benefit cost ratios look like from that using a classic TRC test? And there's a lot of lines here. The first 4 are the opt-in rates that were tested. The next 3 were the default rates that were tested. And then the ones on the bottom were a simulation, assuming you got the same impacts and the same enrollments without the IHD that you got from default with the IHD, which in fact we didn't see the IHD doing anything, so that was a legitimate assumption. What would the benefit cost ratio be if you didn't offer that technology? But even with the cost of the technology, the default rates were much more cost effective. Without the technology, they were kind of wildly cost effective with benefit cost ratios in the around 4, whereas the opt-in rates with the offer of the IHD was the one that dipped below 1. So that's an important result. So a few quick slides on the survey results. They asked customers, this is all on a 4-point scale of strongly agree or somewhat agree, strongly, well, somewhat disagree, strongly agree with a bunch of statements. So the blue bars are the strongly or somewhat agree with the statement. The yellow bars are the somewhat or strongly disagree with the statement. And the statement, my current pricing plan is fair. As it turns out, customers on the time-varying rates actually had higher agreement with that statement than those on the standard increasing block rate. And I think the reason for that is this: my current pricing plan provides me with opportunities to save money. They get it. Customers get it. They see that by changing their behavior, they can reduce their bills on this. Whereas on a increasing block rate or a flat rate, they don't see that. They don't understand these rates. First of all, it's easier for customers to understand a time use rate than an increasing block rate. SMUD's only got a 2-tier rate. The other utilities in California have a 4-tier increasing block rate. Very difficult to know what your marginal price is at any given time. But here we see customers on the standard rate, about 33% think that's a fair rate, or I'm sorry, that they have an opportunity to save money. Whereas the customers on the default tariffs, it was around 60%, and on the opt-in tariffs, it was 75%. Those are huge numbers. SMUD should be offering the pricing plan I am on to all customers. Pretty common, even with the standard plan, the default plan, about 50%. The customers on the opt-in rates responded, agreed with that statement more, around 70% agreed with that statement. I want to stay on my pricing plan. Even the default customers, about 50% said, yeah, I want to stay on the pricing plan. The opt-in customers, about 75% said, I want to stay on the pricing plan. And this is just kind of summing up the things I said. So I think the key takeaways to me from this is that, what Ahmed said earlier, that, we have plenty of evidence that customers can and will respond to time-varying rates. No question about that. Hundreds of studies. This is just one more data point. Even without enabling technology. In this instance, the offer of an in-home display as an inducement to enroll in the rates didn't move the needle at all, nor did it move the average impact for those who took the IHD. Importantly, very importantly, in this instance, it's possible to implement default pricing without people marching in the streets, without them beating down your door or your call center. There was very little backlash from customers that were defaulted onto these rates. Obviously, enrollment under the default marketing was 4 to 5 times larger than under opt-in. The aggregate impacts were much higher and obtained more cost effectively. And as a researcher, and I think this is important to the industry, anybody contemplating doing more experiments, you can do a true experiment. There's been a lot of experiments out there that claim to be randomized controlled trials that aren't really. But this was a true RCT with a recruitment delay or a randomized encouragement design, which from a a causality perspective, it's the best way to estimate what the impacts are of a particular treatment. And they did it without customers beating down the door or calling their congressman or legislator saying what's going on here. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Wayne Harbaugh. I'm Director of Pricing and Regulatory Services at Baltimore Gas and Electric. I want to thank the EDF for inviting me here today and to share some of BG&E's experience with dynamic pricing over the last 40 years. So actually, we've been doing some form of time-varying prices since just after 1970, and I'll go through some of that. Kind of the obligatory first slide is just who is Baltimore Gas Electric? Well, you can tell Baltimore in the name. You got a hint of where it might be. We are Maryland's largest distribution utility. Maryland deregulated the supply market back in 1999, so we are a pipes and wires company. Next year, we'll celebrate our 200th anniversary. We're actually the oldest gas company in the United States, founded in 1816. We have about 1.2 million electric customers, 650,000 gas customers, serve a load of about 31 million megawatt hours in over a year. Our peak demand is about 7,200 megawatts, and we have about 3,400 employees at BG&E, and we are the newest member of the Exelon utility family. What are some of the key challenges that BG&E is facing today? Certainly, we are seeing that customers are demanding better service reliability. Sandy visited us. We had the derecho move through. We had some very serious ice storms, Rita, Katrina, and it certainly appears that storms are becoming happening more often. We have very aggressive DSM goals. In 2008, Empower Maryland was passed, and Empower Maryland was legislation that set aspirational goals for the state of reducing electric use per customer by 15% and peak load by 15% compared to 2007. So at that period of time, we were growing at 2 to 3% per year. We had to overcome all of that and actually reduce overall use per customer. We believe that was probably the most aggressive DSM goals in the country. We are seeing, as others are, growing levels of intermittent and renewable energy on the grid. Emergence of smart appliances. I thought they were going to be here by now. We've been talking to GE and Whirlpool, and they were delayed a little bit, but we're very hopeful that they are going to be coming. Certainly, we are seeing a number of electric vehicles starting to come in on the system. So we do believe that's going to be very relevant going forward. And then we have an old system. I mentioned we're the oldest utility in the United States. We have a lot of old infrastructure, distribution, transmission infrastructure that we need to replace. I'm going to be talking a little bit about programs, and here I'm going to take a little bit of an exception to Mr. Kaufman's earlier statements. Now, I think he said that, or he believed that utilities would only do energy efficiency and demand response if it was legislated or mandated, and certainly BG&E, that's not the case. All these programs you're going to hear today from me are something that BG&E started on our own. There was no regulation, no forcing by the commission, no legislation putting them in place. First one I want to talk about is our Peak Rewards program. And it was established in 2008, but that's really the resurrection of that. Actually, we've been doing residential demand response since about 1975. We had switches that we put on our central air conditioning units. We're very different from Con Ed. We have about 70% of all of our residential customers have either a central air conditioning unit or a heat pump. We have a lot of window air conditioners in Baltimore City, but that's not the predominant air conditioning load on our system. So with Peak Rewards, we actually, customers volunteer to have a smart thermostat put in their house or a switch on the air conditioner. And during certain peak times of the year, we cycle the air conditioner at a 50, 75, or 100% control level. Basically, customers can get $12.50 a month during the summer months if they cycle at 50, and then you can go up to $50 a month if you cycle at 100%. So customers can volunteer, they can go on and off of it. We also let the customers opt out of it. So if they have an event that's going on a certain day and it's not a PJM emergency event, they can either call us or go online and actually opt out of that control event. So a lot of control in the hands of the customers. We have about 400,000 residential customers that are participating in that program. We're seeing a load reduction of about 1 kW for every one of those units. In the 2010 timeframe, we started rolling out our AMI project, Smart Grid. We were fortunate. We were one of the recipients of one of the $200 million ARRA grants that helped fund the project. It was about a $500 million project. This summer, we'll be wrapping up the installation. Every customer on our system, by the middle of the summer, will have a smart meter that's there. We're collecting a number of data points. We're collecting kWh, as most people are. We're also collecting VAR data, voltage data, and tampering alerts. So if the meter is pulled or disconnected, we will get an alert on that. We have remote disconnect functions on our meters. About 20% of our customers move in or out of a house every year. We have a large number of universities. I've been told we actually have more university students than Boston in our area. So we have a lot of seasonal folks moving in and out. We have a number of also military bases, and there's a very large turnover in the residential housing for those. So the remote disconnects allows us to turn the meter on so that when a customer walks into the house or, gee, I'm moving in, I forgot to call the utility, they can call us, and in 5 minutes we can turn the meter on for the customer. If they move out, they can call us and we can turn it off for them. We also have a new Smart Energy Manager program, and that is really a display. I think there was a discussion about in-home displays. We did some testing of some in-home displays, but actually found that our customers said the display that they wanted was smartphone. So actually, what we have is they can go into a computer, sign in, take a look at their hourly usage, take a look at their energy usage for the last 12 months, and we also give them a comparison of their usage versus some of their neighbors. So customers actually can go into our website, say how big their house is, what kind of heat, electric you have, how many people are at home, and we come up with a comparison group, and we actually give them some information on the energy use of all of their neighbors or a set of general neighbors and also their efficient neighbors. Before, I never knew whether I'm using energy as wisely as my next door neighbors or not. This actually gives them an idea of, okay, maybe I'm using a little bit more than my other neighbors. The other program that we have is called Smart Energy Rewards, and that is a dynamic pricing program. It is a peak time rebate program that has been implemented, and it is the default pricing for every residential customer who has a smart meter on our system, which will, by the end of this summer, be every customer. So we will have 1.1 million residential customers on peak time pricing by the end of this summer. What happens on how do we call these peak rewards days? Certainly we do upfront customer education. We call an event, we try to call it the evening before. So if tomorrow's going to be a critical peak event day, and typically that's determined by very high projections of LMP prices on PJM, or if we might have something going on our system that we want to call an event day, we'll call it. Send notifications out to customers. Customers can choose how they want to get it. They can get it through email, phone, a text message, on the web, or actually we can call their landline if they have them. Most of our millennials don't have landline phones anymore. We can get all of those messages out to 1.1 million customers in less than 3 hours. So we typically start calling it about 4 o'clock on the day before the event. Then we overnight calculate an individual baseline for every customer or every residential customer we have. 1.1 million baselines are calculated based on the highest 3 days over the last 14 days that they have. And we also throw in a weather adjustment for that. So that's very critical. Then we calculate the rebates. We are paying $1.25 per kilowatt hour for every reduction that the customers make versus their individually calculated baselines. So if you lower your kilowatt hours during typically a 1 to 7 p.m. period for us, we're a very heavy summer peaking utility, we add up all of your baseline hours, all of your actual usage hours, and we pay you $1.25 for any reduction that you make for that. Then a critical piece that I think we need is to almost immediately inform customers of the savings. So within typically a day or at most 2 days, customers can go on to that web portal and see, okay, I saved 10 kilowatt hours, I'm going to get a check for 10 times $1.25. Not a check, but they're going to get a reduction on their bill. So they can see that there. During the course of the summer, they'll actually be able to see all of the events and how many kilowatt hours they saved and the credits that they got on that. And then when the bills come out, we'll have a line item on that showing these are the days that you saved, these are the critical event days, these are the kilowatt hours you saved, times that $1.25. When we kicked off the program, and I'm not going to go through, I know time is limited, so I think you can probably read this. We did a lot of outreach to customers to inform them. On event days, we're actually using television now and radio. So if we're going to call an event for tomorrow, we are on the evening news, try to get a spot on the weather portion of the evening news on all the major channels, and say tomorrow is going to be an event day, trying to save energy. Again, we're a lot of online media available. I'm going to go a little bit quicker here. And we also, I mentioned, give customers a lot of information. We send out paper reports to all of our customers, at least for the first year or two after an event. So they're not only getting the online data that's available to them. Some of our customers, some of our older customers, maybe don't have web access, don't have a smartphone. So we're also sending out paper reports to get customers kind of acclimated to the programs. Just how did we do? 2013 was our first year of rollout, 315,000 residential customers. 75 to 93% earned a rebate. That's based on whether they were one of our peak rewards customers or not. The peak rewards customers were the 93%. Rebates were generally in the $8 to $11 per event range. I actually was up in the $25 to $30 an event range, and I'd be glad to answer questions on how I did that. Question about low-income customers, do they participate in that? We have LIHEAP customers, as all utilities do. We have about 70,000 customers that are on LIHEAP, and they actually saw an equivalent percentage of bill reductions as our non-LIHEAP customers. So again, low-income customers are very active participants. 2014 was the coolest summer since I've been at the utility, which has been over 44 years. So actually, we only did 2 events in 2014. You can see the rebates there for both LIHEAP and non-LIHEAP customers. Motivation, value, we did extensive surveys of our customers afterwards. Very, very high remarks on customer satisfaction, very, very high remarks or responses on believing they're getting value from the program. And I did have a couple of questions about how we did our pilots. And Ahmed mentioned that we'd actually done 4 years' worth of pilots, and I'm going to cover 2 slides here. Back in 2008, we actually started a pilot of about 1,000 residential customers testing both peak time rebate and critical peak pricing. So we really weren't sure which way we were going to go back then. The way we selected those, we took our load research sample. About half of those customers were called and asked if they wanted to go into the pilot, and over 95% of those customers said, yeah, we'd like to try this. And then we solicited about a half of the other customers. We drew a random sample of the remaining customers on our system, and then just phoned the customers and took the customers that said that they would go on it. Again, we had over a 90% take rate for our pilot. So it wasn't a pure random sample, but it was pretty darn close, probably about as good as you can get. We tested price. We also tested an in-home display, an orb. And the orb is a very simple device. It has LEDs in it and glows red on a peak day, green on a non-peak day, and then yellow kind of indicating that something's going to be happening on the next day possible, or next day. These are the breakdown of our pilot design. These are the pricing that we did back then. This is the peak time rebate, critical peak pricing. We were charging $1.30 during the periods, and we were shooting for about 60 hours a year that price would be in place. And then we did the peak time rebate. And kind of the one thing I wanted to just walk through here is that, and these are the reductions we saw. Kind of one thing as an economist that surprised me was that actually the peak time rebate, we saw just about the same percentage reduction as the critical peak pricing. And in discussing this going forward with our consumer advocate, and we had a very active rep from AARP participating in some workshops, they all said that if you want to do critical peak pricing, you can do it, but it has to be on an opt-in basis for customers. But they saw that really the peak time rebate was a no-lose rate. If you did nothing, you were going to pay the same rates you were on. If you did something, you got a savings. And we call that our carrot rate. And both of those groups said if you do it that way, you do your dynamic pricing that way, they had no problem with making it the default rate for everyone. And that's why we went forward with that going forward. So I'd be glad to answer questions. I know we're running a little bit late. There's a number of other slides in my deck about the pilot and the results. Actually, Ahmed and the Brattle Group helped us do the evaluation of the pilots. But thank you very much for the time.
Again, just a quick reminder, if you have any questions, please write them on these cards that we're distributing, and then we'll be happy to ask them at the end.
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is David Becker. I'm the Director of Dynamic Pricing at Elevate Energy. Big thanks to EDF for inviting us out here today. It's been a great discussion on, I guess, what we call dynamic pricing or time variant pricing or hourly pricing, lots of different terms within the industry. A little bit on Elevate Energy. We're a nonprofit based in Chicago, Illinois, mission-based organization, and trying to promote smarter energy use for all. So we help design and implement energy efficiency, demand response programs, and we really want to make sure those benefits are provided to the underserved markets as well. I'm going to talk today, I think I have a lot to cover, so I'll move somewhat quickly, but I'm going to primarily highlight the work we've done in Illinois in hourly pricing programs. We've been involved with hourly pricing in Illinois since 2003. In 2003, we piloted a residential program that utilized day-ahead hourly market prices for electricity. We wanted to prove that residential customers could shift usage based on hourly prices and that they could save money in the process. Based on the success of that pilot, both utilities, Ameren, Illinois, and ComEd, were then legally required to offer an hourly pricing program for their customers. So Ameren offered the Power Smart Pricing Program, which has been in effect since 2007, and ComEd launched their real-time pricing program. Primary differences between these programs: the Ameren Illinois, the Power Smart Pricing Program, utilizes day-ahead market prices, so customers know a day in advance what price they're going to be actually billed on for their electricity use. With the ComEd real-time pricing program, it is the real-time prices. So they don't know what hour, the cost of the current hour until that hour has passed. We do provide a current average of the hour based on the 5-minute pricing feeds. But both programs have had good success as far as bill savings and satisfied customers. The one area I think that's been challenging for these programs is on the enrollment side. Both programs have hovered around 10,000 customers now for about three years or so. A couple major factors, I think. Ahmed touched on a lot of the barriers to dynamic pricing and rates of adoption. As far as other costs within the household, electricity costs in Illinois are still very cheap, probably ranking them below cell phone bill, internet bill, gas bill. So not as much attention placed on electricity pricing. And then the other thing in Illinois is we've had municipal aggregation. So with third-party suppliers in the marketplace, we've had a lot of cities pool all of their constituents, go out to a supplier, get a great rate, and shift everyone onto these other rate options. So we've had much more restricted marketing territories for our programs in recent years. I was asked to touch on a little bit from pilot to implementation, what that process looked like for us in Illinois. I joined Elevate Energy in 2008, so I was not there for the pilot to program implementation. But the findings that we had was, I mean, we had a really positive report from Navigant, who did an evaluation of the pilot program. The success of that report and the successes highlighted from the pilot were pretty much what drove the tariffs to be in place in 2007 and the legislation that was passed. With Ameren Illinois, it was a little bit of a cleaner transition. It was a new program for them. We were selected as their primary administrator for the program. And we're able to help on the initial design. With ComEd, so both programs, I'll back up, both programs had to have a third party administer and market their pricing programs. So both utilities put out RFPs. ComEd selected another administrator, so it was a little bit of a trickier transition to transition over to that new administrator. And then the other big change was that ComEd went from the day-ahead markets, which were utilized in the pilot, to the real-time pricing markets. I mean, a couple other finer details that are listed below in those bullets there. At the time, it was not a deregulated marketplace, so you didn't have separate supply and delivery costs. So we had to, so the changes during the pilot period to when it became a program were more reflective of deregulation within the state of Illinois and how those costs are calculated. So we had to bake in some of those risk premium costs. I think what's interesting is all participants in the pilot received a risk premium cost credit. So they took that hedge away from those customers that were in the hourly pricing program. So right there, we could kind of estimate that you're going to get about a 10% in cost savings on this rate, which was a revenue neutral rate. And we did this without AMI meters in Illinois. So we've started deployment in Illinois of AMI meters. ComEd is expected to go 100% deployment roughly by 2017. Ameren, about 2/3 of their customers by 2019. Up until this time, we utilize interval recording meters for the program. Just doing some price comparisons, that used to be a pretty big difference between your KWH meter for flat rate customers and interval meter. According to our chief engineer, those KWH meters aren't even being manufactured anymore. It's primarily just solid state meters. And when you look at solid state meters, the cost of an interval meter versus an AMI meter, those costs are roughly about equal. So the advantages now going to AMI, I think, are a little bit more appealing than they were when we were rolling out these programs in 2003. But we were still able to provide hourly pricing. It just required a meter reader to go out and probe and get the data. So a little bit on our role as primary administrator. So we have a dedicated call center. We handle all phone calls for these programs. 90% of all phone calls get to us within 30 seconds. We provide marketing and outreach to our customers. We also have a live chat feature on the website, which has been really handy, especially as there's peaks in hourly pricing. We provide the education and enrollment. We have an online bill comparison tool, so customers can access their usage, they can get their hourly usage, they can see how did they compare to the flat rate on a monthly basis through the bill comparison tool. With AMI data now, we're actually about to launch an upgrade on that tool within the next week that's going to allow them to see a day afterwards, they can look at the following day and look at on an hourly basis, where did they save money with their usage on hourly rates compared to the fixed prices. So the AMI data we're getting is really good. It's going to allow us to provide a lot more data to our customers. We also provide high price alerts. So when prices hit a certain threshold, we notify customers by email, by text message, or by phone call. Point earlier, some customers still have landlines. We want to make sure they can get the same alerts as other customers. And we also have a smartphone app. So for both programs, we develop smartphone apps for our customers. I think our goal as an organization is how do we provide varying degrees of engagement for customers? So not all customers may have smartphones and may not want to interact that way, but for those who do, we want to make sure we're reaching them at that platform. We also have a Twitter feed, so if you want to follow us on Twitter, we'll tweet out the lowest price of the day and the highest price of the day, so you can manage your usage that way. But we're really trying to make it easy. And with the PowerSmart Pricing app, we have different savings goals and targets. When they reach a goal, for example, maybe $500 saved on the program, they'll get to unlock a badge on their phones. We're trying to add some gamification. The badge will tie to a landmark. So in this instance, it says you have surpassed, and the landmark here is the Superman statue in Metropolis, Illinois, which probably nobody here has ever been to or heard of, but it does exist. And it says you've surpassed $500 in savings. Super job saving money. Avoid the kryptonite of peak prices to save even more. So, we're making it fun. But no, we're trying to engage. We're trying to make it a little bit more fun, a little bit more engaging for our customers, and I think they appreciate that. This is a quick shot of savings from 2007 through 2014. Hopefully, I'm not sure those in the back can see it, but what we've seen between 2007 and 2013 is really good, consistent savings with hourly pricing. They've ranged from 11% to 40%. 2012, market rates were extremely low. The fixed rate prices for utilities had a pretty large hedge in there from previous contracts. So those savings, 40% and 35%, that was quite a good year for our customers in our program. What you will notice is 2014, things got a little dire, and that's due to the polar vortex. That dramatically impacted hourly prices in PJM. I'm going to touch a little bit in some slides later on the polar vortex and how our customers responded in the winter, because that was a new thing. We'd never had winter prices be high. Usually that was the time to save. So that was very challenging for us, especially in the call center. And then below the savings touches on the low to high income. And what we've seen, and this is through 2013 data, but very consistent savings regardless of income for those people who are on our program. And I know there's been a lot of discussion around low income today. And I think the way we look at it is we want to provide education and opportunity to these customers. If you look at a fixed rate price, that's not necessarily fair for low income households either. They're paying the same capacity that higher use households are as well in that system. So I think an hourly pricing program, and especially the way ComEd's looking to redo their capacity markets, can provide a lot more value for low income customers. A lot of discussion in the industry about utilities and engaging customers and driving more satisfaction in their customers. Hourly pricing is a way to do that. We have extremely engaged customers who like to talk about peak demand and who follow 5-minute pricing feeds, and some of them may do their laundry at 2 a.m. We don't advocate for that, but if they want to do it, it's their choice, and they can try to save money that way. But we have very engaged customers. We also have an AC cycling program similar to the one that was touched on for BG&E. And what we've seen is our participants in our program, about 33% have adopted the AC cycling program. Compared that to the general population, about 2% adoption rates. So our customers are very eager for the technologies. There's been a lot of talk about IHDs and smart thermostats and washing machines. And our customers are ready for that. They're waiting for it, where I think the general customers might not be there yet. Hourly pricing rates and dynamic rates is a great way to start engaging these customers and then layering on technologies. We have very high satisfaction rates for our program. The rates there at the bottom, 98% satisfaction with a dedicated call center. 91% report the program is quick and easy, so much for the argument that hourly pricing is really complicated. We stress the general pricing curves in the summer and non-summer. When you really look at it, it is pretty easy. The warmer the day, the higher the prices. The warmer it gets, the higher they get. It's pretty intuitive. And then 88% overall satisfaction. So these satisfaction rates are actually before the polar vortex. And even with polar vortex, when customers were charged at times almost $2 a kilowatt hour, $2, there's still an 80% satisfaction rate with the program when we followed up with them that year. So even still with high prices, people are still satisfied. There's a lot going on in this slide, but this one, I think the main thing here is there are environmental benefits from hourly pricing and from dynamic pricing. We looked at it from two areas, from the environmental benefits from conservation. So customers on ComEd's real-time pricing program reduce their usage on average by about 5%. It's a 5% reduction of energy use for those customers. With Ameren, we actually don't see a net reduction. Well, we just updated our results. About 2 days ago, a new report came in, and right now it's about 0.4%. So it's a very small reduction for Ameren. And the reason why is they have a lot more households with electric heat. So with cheaper prices in the wintertime, those customers crank up their electric heat a little bit more. So it's just the differences in that customer base. We also enrolled a lot more customers with electric heat in PowerSmart pricing. We specifically would target those customers because we knew they would do well in this program. So the participants are a little bit skewed a little bit more towards electric heat households. But we do see reductions on the ComEd program, which is why that orange column for ComEd is much larger. And then there are some environmental benefits from load shifting. Now those ones get a little bit trickier year over year because year over year, what fuel sources use at different times of the day can change. Right now it's changed a lot. Right now in the margins, you're seeing a lot more natural gas use, especially in Illinois, than you had in the past. In the past, there's a lot more coal-fired plants. As we retire more coal, move into more natural gas, that can kind of skew the environmental benefits from load shifting. But at the time this was done and based on other studies, we saw benefits there as well. There's a question about distribution only and the costs and benefits. I'm probably going to just skim over this quickly because I think we've touched on this before. But some of the benefits, you get the flatter load shape, less peaky, better utilization of resources. On the cost side, whether or not the company is vertically integrated is obviously going to play a role, and whether or not customers reduce usage, so whether or not that's going to cut into the revenues of those utilities. So we actually did a study to look into hourly pricing and what if it was the default rate for customers with smart meters. So we were able to take customers with smart meter data. The first study we did, we've done 2 studies. We're going to complete a third at the end of the next 2 months. First study was usage data from 2010 to 2011. We took customers that had no clue. Well, they weren't on an hourly pricing rate. They're on a fixed price rate. So they weren't adjusting to usage or to hourly prices. They weren't getting alerts. They weren't getting education. Just structurally, how would they do in the program? And I think the other thing that's an interesting point is that most flat rate customers, well, maybe not most, but there are a fair amount of flat rate customers who think they're already on a dynamic pricing plan. In our call center, we have questions all the time from customers saying, well, I'm already shifting usage. I already do that at night because it's cheaper. And we tell them, no, it's not cheaper, actually. You're on a flat rate. It's the same price every hour of the day. Really? Well, I want to get on your rate. It's like, all right, come on over. So, there's a lot of misconception, I think, amongst customer base. I see my slides skipped ahead. So the first study that we looked at from the data 2010-2011, 2/3 of customers would have saved money by being on hourly pricing. And these customers didn't shift usage. They had no knowledge of hourly pricing. Just based on their load shape, 2/3 of customers would have saved. If you looked at who saved and who didn't, the customers primarily who did not save were those very small customers. And at the time, we had a participation fee for the program, $2.50 to participate in the program. That's since been reduced to 39 cents, so that percent who saved would probably even go up higher. In addition, if you look at capacity and how that's calculated, for a smaller household, they're getting the industry average for their customer segment. So it's not really a fair characterization for a low usage household, and that's currently changing in ComEd. It's going to be based on their peak load contribution from the previous 12 months, from the previous summer. So going forward, we look at these numbers to improve even more. When you looked at that period in 2012 when hourly rates were really good, we did another study. We took the same smart meter data. We sample size 97,000 customers, and we saw that 85% would have saved money by doing nothing. 15% would have paid a little bit more. And if you look at the average saved, $178 over the year, average loss $30. So those who saved a lot more than those who would have lost a little bit more. Total savings of $15 million in that 1 year alone. 2014 was a polar vortex, which I touched on before. And this slide here shows you the hourly prices during the winter months for 2012 to 2013 versus a polar vortex. So the high bar, the green bar there, shows you those prices during the polar vortex. So for example, at 6 a.m., the price was on average 4 cents typically, was now 7 cents with the polar vortex. So much higher prices during the winter months, which is, again, something we'd never seen before. On January 7th, prices peaked at about $2 a kilowatt hour for customers in our program. What this graph shows is usage for customers before January 7th, which is the blue line, and after January 7th. What we saw from January 7th through the end of March was a conservation effect that was consistent every single day during the evening. And we'd never seen peak reduction in the evening like this before in our hourly pricing programs, because most of our peaks are during the middle of the day, especially on the hot summer days. So this was a pretty unique, pretty interesting finding from the polar vortex. So the conservation effect, I had mentioned before, it's about 5% in ComEd. After January 7th, they reduced by an additional 9% in the single-family household, 7% in multifamily. So an overall reduction of about 14% single-family, 11% in multifamily. And this is without technology. There's no technology here at all. This is just customers responding to prices, responding to alerts and education, and shifting their usage accordingly, and trying to reduce as much as they could in the winter. I wanted to touch on, too, 5 months, okay. In 2010, we provided call center support and marketing for the ComEd Customer Applications Pilot. Has anyone heard of this pilot? Show of hands. A few of you. So this pilot was pretty interesting because what ComEd did was they took roughly 8,500 customers, put them on to all sorts of different dynamic rates, tested different types of technology, and we wanted to see what would happen. So we tested out inclining block rates, we tested out critical peak pricing, we tested out peak time rebate, we tested out hourly pricing on the day-ahead markets, and we tested out time of use rates. And we divided everyone up. We also tested out 2 different types of in-home display devices with these customers. And you can see it was a pretty complex, pretty complicated kind of rate design. We had bill protection for some had to pay for devices, some didn't. Very complicated. But I think some of the major takeaways from this pilot that we were involved with was that A, the customers didn't care what rate they were on, to the point where they weren't kicking and screaming saying, bring me back my flat rate. We had less than a 2% opt-out rate for customers who were opted in without them, well, they were provided information, so it's not without them knowing. They're opted in if they read their mail, which not everyone is guaranteed to read their mail. But we tried to provide that education on the rates that they're going to be on. But I think this underlined that customers were okay with this. And when we conducted surveys at the end of the pilot, the lowest levels of satisfaction were those customers who were on the flat rate. So customers liked the opportunity to save money, and these were all revenue neutral rates as well. The other thing was that the IHDs and the uptake and the level of adoption with in-home display devices was very small. We mailed IHDs to people's households. One of them looked like an awesome iPad. I mean, it looked sweet. I thought everyone's going to start activating this device. And about 5% of the people did. Because they just had no bearing. They had no clue. They'd never engaged this way with their electricity rates. So our customers on the program that are paying for hourly pricing would have loved the device because they get it. They understand the use value there. So I think that was pretty interesting. So I think it's been a rate ahead of its time. Since 2003, we've been offering hourly pricing in Illinois, and just now technology is starting to catch up to layer on additional benefits for customers and hourly pricing programs. electric vehicle adoption. We're trying to make this the EV rate. There's no reason why people with electric vehicles shouldn't be on hourly pricing. There's no reason why this shouldn't be integrated within the car sale or the charging stations. We're trying to figure out an entry point there to get everybody on hourly rates so they're charging off peak. The smartphone app already touched on, that's up and operating. We've done thermostat pilots where the thermostats will automatically reduce usage based on hourly prices. We tested that out last summer, which had nice results. So I think there's some opportunities there with thermostats, especially the open APIs and these Wi-Fi enabled thermostats that are hitting the market. The IHD in the middle there is one of the ambient joules. The ambient joule, the AMI data can show you real-time usage, real-time cost information. It can glow based on prices. That's gonna be really nice for our customers and other appliances. So hopefully this is the future of hourly pricing, and I think for us, like I said, our main challenge is with an opt-in program, it's getting people involved, it's getting the word out, it's driving that word of mouth, and luckily we have 2 utilities who are very supportive of the program. So we feel fortunate, and hopefully the future is bright moving forward. So, thank you.
So what we would like to do right now is to give some stakeholders the first shot at asking questions. So for that, I'm going to introduce a Q&A panel that we invited. The first person on the panel is Bob Scimenti, who is the Senior Vice President of Electric Operations at Con Edison. Mr. Scimenti and his team manage the design, construction, operation, and maintenance of the electric system for Con Ed in New York City and Westchester County. Recently, he has served as VP of Engineering and Planning, and he has held positions in electric construction, control center operations, and substation operations. He also serves on the board of the Brooklyn Botanical Garden and architecture. The second person on our panel is Richard Berkeley, who is the Executive Director of New York's Utility Project, an initiative of Public Utility Law Project of New York, which assists and advocates for consumers, particularly low-income consumers, with utility-related issues. The Public Utility Law Project advocates for universal service, affordability, and customer protection for New York State utility customers. Mr. Berkeley has previously held positions of the Chief of Staff and Counsel to Senator Kevin Parker of the New York State Senate and Director of Senate Energy Committee on Energy and Telecommunications. And finally, we're going to have questions from Rudy Stuggemuller, who is Special Assistant for Energy Policy at the New York State Department of Public Service, and he is working on all aspects of the REV initiative. And I can't see Rudy here. Okay, sorry, I was looking at the wrong place. Okay, so in the interest of time, I'm going to ask you to ask quick 1 or 2 questions, and then we're going to move on to the questions from the audience. So I will be passing the microphone to you.
Thank you. I think I'll just do one question because I'm sure there's a ton of people that have questions, including my colleague Marco here, who's going to probably take one. I think for all the panelists, if we assume hypothetically that the aggregate effect of all the pilots and demonstrations is to demonstrate generally the efficacy of time variant pricing, I'm still hearing a lot of different sorts of mechanisms and different strategies for customer engagement. Is there a coalescence around a single approach that seems to be gaining acceptance as the preferred way to do this? I mean, it's about difference between rebates and just straight pricing and direct load control. Are things starting to coalesce, or do we still need to explore lots of different options? And again, not just for the right economically correct formula, but for the most effective customer engagement strategy.
I'll take a first crack. I think a lot of the utilities are in different places. We were very fortunate in that we were just about to replace our billing system at the time we were going into our smart grid deployment. We put in a smart grid that's collecting a lot of hourly data. We had to put in a new meter data management system. So to be able to do what we did with peak time rebate, you need the meters in place. You need a good billing system that I mentioned we were calculating 1.1 million baselines every night on the fly. And then you need a good meter data management system to make sure you have good billing quality data in your system. So some utilities aren't at that point yet. So, I think there are going to be other, time of use pricing. We've been doing that since the mid-'70s. 100,000 residential customers on it. Every customer I have who's over 60 kW is on time of use pricing. Again, effective for us. But for us, we like this. We're a very peaky utility. I mentioned our peak is 7,200 megawatts. If I could go down to the 61st highest hour, I'm at 6,000 megawatts. So I really don't need to control 800 hours of use, which you do in a time of use. Every day is certain time periods. We really needed to control 60. And when you're controlling that many hours, you can actually afford to give a very higher price signal. And that really, we believe, is what's driving the higher reductions that we're seeing right now. We're seeing reductions averaging for non-control customers, non-technology customers, probably about 13% peak load reductions. We're seeing about a 22, 23% for those who have the technology, the smart thermostats. So, but by having that technology in place, I think is really driving some of the savings we're seeing. All utilities aren't going to be in the same position to do that, or they have different load curves.
A few thoughts. I think the short answer to your question is no. There isn't a consensus on what's the right way to approach this. There are several different camps out there. There's the peak time rebate camp that Wayne kind of represents, and there's quite a bit of that on the East Coast. Out in California, SoCal Edison and San Diego started down that path and then reversed course because of the inherent difficulties in accurately estimating baseline, or having a baseline that accurately estimates reductions at the individual customer level. So they found that they were paying an awful lot for not much demand reduction out there, and they've kind of reversed to a voluntary rather than a default approach. I think SMUD has the chance to be the first utility in the country to go to default time-based pricing for all residential customers. They're talking actively about that. Their board is considering it. They could do it as early as 2018. My prediction is if they do that, and I think they will, and that's just me guessing, not any inside information, I think we'll start to see a sea change where more utilities will do that, where the metering platform is in place. The other thought is that on an opt-in basis, you can't just file a tariff and expect customers to show up. You have to market it. And there's good examples of that. I think SMUD's opt-in campaign was successful by industry standards. The shining lights in this area are the Salt River Project in Arizona Public Service, where they have 30 to 60% of their customers on an opt-in tariff. They've done that over a couple of decades of active marketing and communication with their customers and getting them as they come on as new customers. And their time use rate is pretty attractive for many of their customers. So you can get high enrollment on an opt-in basis, but you have to work at it, and it can be costly to do that. So you have to look at the economics of it. So I think I think we're at the cusp of a lot of change and like I say, I think if SMUD goes, some will follow, and then we'll start to see where we're at. Amon and I often talk about this, and I think within a decade we'll see a lot of default time-based pricing, even at the residential customer level. But I'll probably be retired by then, so.
I'll just, a couple comments. I think shadow billing could go really far to drive awareness and adoption of dynamic rates. So if customers could more easily gain information to get a bill comparison of here's your bill on a flat rate, here's what it could have been if you're on hourly, here's what it could have been if you're on time of use. I think that's going to be pretty. I think that could be a really big driver. There's a green button initiative to get data, but I think making it easier to provide value with that data, just giving a customer the data, I don't think is enough. There are some privacy concerns there around utilizing that data, especially for marketing purposes, especially if it's a third party doing enrollment. I know we're seen as competition right now by the other suppliers in the marketplace. So we have to, I guess, fight a fair game, even though we're highly regulated as a utility partner compared with other suppliers. So I think that's been tricky. And then regarding peak time rewards, Ameren's going to roll out their peak time rewards program in October. ComEd has peak time savings. I think my main concern there is if that amount the customer gets for action is not that much. Capacity markets in MISO are a little bit different from PJM, and right now it's looking like a half a kilowatt hour maybe credit, or 50 cents, sorry, and that's not that much money. So there could be, I'm concerned there could be some negative whiplash around dynamic rates if they're not getting enough credit for behavior.
Okay, Bob Schimanti from Con Ed. So interesting discussion. I think we're in information overload right now, but I want to clarify a couple of things that many have said here. So some comments around this transition, maybe 3 to 5 years, still some fear around a transition or a change into doing something different because there might be some negative effects. From a customer perspective, maybe lack of time to even think about energy usage. And so in that perspective, if this is a 3 to 5 year transition, think about customers 5 years from now where convenience and choice maybe are very different today, where ease of use or folks actually thinking for them and give them a very simple option to select where they know exactly what they're entering into, and whether it's focusing around cost savings, connected to some sense of environmental goodness. What would you suggest as our utility in New York transitioning with certainly a demographic that's a bit unique, but residential peak not coincident with the system peak, dense load, large apartment dwelling, a bunch of master metered buildings, and our load peak around 13,000 megawatts, but we go from 12,000 megawatts to 13,000 megawatts for about 30 hours. So we're designing around a 30 hours. So what would you recommend for us to move towards? Because it sounds like default rate and technology are certainly enablers there for some of the successes. Sometimes technology not a benefit. I mean, I think you get results without the technology. But if you thought about this 3 to 5 years from now, where technology much more seamless, what do you think we should be doing as this transition takes place?
I was talking with Colin Smart, who works for you, yesterday about this, and Mike Harrington, and Con Ed is pretty unique. I might have a different answer for you than I would have for the upstate utilities and stuff. You guys are so unique. The high penetration of the room air conditioning and the multifamily dwellings and all of that makes it an interesting challenge. My belief is that you've got this reforming the energy vision in New York is a great concept. As an economist, I don't know how you do that without getting the price signals down to the customers. You don't have the metering platform in place to do that. I think that's essential to what you're trying to accomplish here, personally. And that's going to take some time. But once you get it in place, then whether you're passing the price signals through to aggregators, as the commissioner said this morning, or to customers, you can get similar results. And if you pass it through to customers, I've always been a believer. I've designed retail markets around the world, and many, back when that was in fashion. And I've always felt that a great enabler of competition is getting the price signals through to customers, and then let the retailers and energy service providers come in and operate off of that accurate price signal. And they can come in and offer flat prices, they can come in and offer technology and things like that. I think without that, you're creating what might appear to be a competitive market, but whether you're going to improve economic efficiency or convenience for customers, I don't know. So I think it's pretty fundamental to what you're trying to accomplish, and I think what you're trying to accomplish is a great thing. But you got to have the platform to do that. And I personally also think that's the role of the distribution service provider is to put in the metering. I mean, we can imagine a world where you've got competitive metering supply, but it didn't bring smart meters in the UK like people predicted it might. I had an assignment about 10 years ago to go around and talk to all of the competitive metering service providers in the UK because I was working for a client that wanted to enter that market, and they didn't enter the market because there really wasn't a market there. It's a network business, and you're a network provider. So I think that's the proper role for who's going to get that platform in place.
Yeah, the last thing I want to do sitting here as a utility is to give any advice to another utility. Been in this business for 44 years, most of it in the regulatory area, and I know that all of us are a little bit different as far as the makeup of our system, the types of customers you have. But I would agree that I think kind of a base to go forward with is having that the hourly data or the 15-minute data from customers, getting the smart meters in place. I almost see that as kind of like being the internet when it first came about. Basically, it was universities exchanging data back then, or the federal government exchanging data. We had no clue what was going to be coming down the road once we got that communications set up. Really, smart grid, we talk about the smart meters, but it's really the smart communication system that we have. We're going to be using that for a lot of distribution activity. I'll give you an example of one thing. We're getting ready to install conservation CVR, conservation voltage reduction technology on our system. We would never have been comfortable doing that. Our engineers would not have been comfortable doing that if we didn't know what the voltage was at the end of the line. We all know what the voltage is in the substation. Maybe you're measuring it halfway down the feeder, but our engineers always erred on the high side. We can have voltage plus or minus 5%, residential customer 120 volts, 126 volts to 114 volts. If you're a good Scotty engineer like on Star Trek, you always erred on the high side. I'm always going to probably have over voltage on that just to make sure that last customer on that feeder has that low end voltage. As we've looked at the feeders now with our data or our meter data that's in, we're collecting voltage data, we found that we've been over activating almost every feeder on our system, and we have a lot of opportunity to drop the voltage, and we believe we can actually cut about 1% of the total energy usage on our system by managing that voltage better. So it's another piece of data we're bringing back from those smart meters and the communications, the real-time communication system that we installed. So I think once we get that data, I think the utilities are going to have a lot of things that you can do with it. We have some theft detection stuff in work now. I mentioned we're using remote connect, disconnect customers. Our customers really love it. Used to be we would give them, we'll give you an AM or PM when we're going to turn your meter on if you're a new customer moving in. And oh, by the way, you have to be there. So customers would have to go spend 6 hours, waiting for the utility truck to show up, and then we would turn their meter on. Today we go, the customer picks up the phone, and like I say, 5 minutes later we can turn the service on to that customer. So getting that basic communication technology, getting your AMI systems in place, I just think there's going to be a lot of pluses for the distribution system, for the generation system, for the transmission system down the road if you get that up and running.
I also have a quick comment. Just if I can pile on to the platform of the smart meters and the AMI, I think it's very similar to a cell phone. When we first had cell phones, we knew what we thought was going to be really good about them is we could talk anywhere. I don't think anyone thought we'd be able to do email and have apps and it'd be our camera and everything else it does. I think smart meter, smart grid platform is very similar. We understand right now what these benefits could be, but I think the future of what the benefits could be on that platform are still unknown. So I think getting that platform in place will be pretty key. Yeah.
Yeah, first I wanted to say, to the extent what I was hearing was the creation of something like a hold harmless rate, so people who didn't opt into the real-time pricing were still left essentially without any increases to their base charge. I applaud that. I think that's great. I have a bunch of questions, but I'll just ask one so the audience who've been very carefully asking or writing down questions the whole time will get a chance. And that is, to the extent that you paid for the rollout of smart meters and all of the associated infrastructure to make them work on your system, how did the cost get allocated between the ratepayers, the utility, and the energy service companies? Because we're looking at large-scale adoption of smart meters potentially in New York. To pick Con Ed, hypothetically, the cost could be anywhere between $1 and $2 billion. And obviously, that would be a fairly large burden in a city where there are essentially 375,000 customers that fall into the low-income category, and across the rest of the state, there's a fairly large number, too.
You being the utility guy.
Good question. Our rollout of the smart grid system, the communications, the meters, about $500 million I mentioned cost. Fortunately, we got one of those $200 million DOE grants, which kind of helped do the offset. But the system, right now, all of those costs are sitting in a regulatory asset for BG&E. Not the way we would have preferred to go, but we'll be coming in later this year for a rate case to start getting cash recovery on that regulatory asset. So we are earning on it. That's sitting there. It's earning. But when we started our project, it was kind of not the norm, let's say. And I think as we get 50 million meters installed now, it's probably becoming pretty common. We're certain we're going to have a very good cost benefit. We have to come back to the Maryland Commission, show them that the cost benefit of doing this is well above 1, and we are easily within that frame. Again, just the not having to go out manually read meters. We are bidding the load reductions from our peak rewards and our Smart Energy Rewards program into the PJM capacity market. So we've bid in several hundred megawatts. We're getting those RPM benefits back from PJM. We get checks every month we have to bid them 3 years out, but once you're in that year, you get checks for the capacity. We're also monetizing the energy. As we have these events, you have some energy savings versus the LMP. And those benefits, the pricing benefits, the price reduction benefits, are big pieces of our savings. I also mentioned this allows us to do CVR. We believe that's about a 1% energy reduction going forward. So we believe we're going to have a very positive cost-benefit analysis. We'll be filing it probably, as I say, sometime later this year, but it'll be a very detailed cost-benefit breakdown of the savings that we'll have. But it'll go into rate base. It'll be recovered from all customers at that time.
Yeah, the kind of net benefits of advanced metering vary a lot across utilities. And again, Con Ed is probably somewhat unique with its, you've got a very dense service territory, so I think your manual meter reading costs are probably low relative to a lot of utilities. You got a lot of meters in the basement. We're putting in AMI. You got a communication problem and things like that. So, Con Ed's going to be on one end of that spectrum, and some of the upstate utilities that have, higher meter reading costs that can be offset by advanced metering. The economics of the operational business savings vary a lot. If you've got an AMR system in place right now that hasn't been kind of paid off, your current meter reading costs are really low. So that's not going to offset a lot of the cost of an advanced metering system. So you got to look at each utility and the technology that they choose to put in and what their current operational, the avoided operational cost would be. And then what you can achieve from other things like demand response enabled by the platform that allows you to avoid building peaking capacity and different things like that. So you have to look at it holistically. But at the end of the day, I mean, they should over the long haul, pay for themselves through the combination of avoided costs on current operations and avoided capacity costs and the other kinds of things you're trying to achieve with REV. Look at those benefit streams as well.
Let me take some of the questions from the audience. One of the questions is that for REV, the question of systemic demand reduction is crucial and flexibility is crucial. Does your program design optimize system demand reduction at what level? This is for all of the panelists.
Say that last part again.
System demand reduction.
Does your program design optimize system demand reduction at what level?
Go ahead, Wayne.
Oh, pick on the guy at the end of the table. We believe we are. I mentioned that we were an early adopter of time of use rates. We believe they're very effective with the time of use meters, the old time use meters that we used to have. But really, as I mentioned, really our problem is not 800 hours a year, which time of use is kind of going after. Our problem was 60 hours a year. Again, if I could knock the top 60 hours down to the 61st hour, I just saved 1,200 megawatts at the time of the peak. You don't have to build capacity to serve that. It's not sitting there. My load factor goes up pretty dramatically. So really, we were trying to optimize our pricing to address those 60 hours. And we felt that either the critical peak pricing or the peak time rebate was the area that we really wanted to go after to optimize what we were, for our system, which is very heavy summer peaking, going after. Now, it's going to be different for other utilities. The other thing we wanted to do is, I mentioned we see a lot of EVs coming onto our system. And there we think that actually our time of use pricing is extremely important to encourage those customers to charge off-peak. I have an attorney, are attorneys in the room? Hands? Yeah, a lot of attorneys. I have an attorney friend who bought a Tesla, and he's charging that at 19 kW. And a month later, his wife was so enamored with the car, guess what? There's now 2 Teslas sitting in the garage. So yeah, it's about a 40 kW load just from the cars. And our typical residential transformer, we have some in the older neighborhoods, might be 25 kVA, might be 50. But really, you want that load to be off-peak. So time of use is just an ideal way to ensure that every night those cars are charging off-peak. So we actually have a very aggressive off-peak rate to encourage customers to charge. So again, it depends on what you're trying to go after. You're trying to go after those peak hours, or you're trying to every day have some signal that you're sending to customers to charge those EVs off-rate. We love EVs, but we don't want them charging at 6 p.m. on a 105-degree day in Baltimore. So.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I think for hourly pricing, definitely for ComEd, because PJM is such a large territory, the system peaks and the market prices when they peak on PJM aren't necessarily representative of what's happening locally within ComEd and within that specific territory. So when that hot weather moves to Chicago, we'll get the high prices first, and then usually on the back end, because the East Coast is now on fire, rates will stay high for our customers. So it doesn't always perfectly align with, I think, the local distribution and markets, but overall, I think it does a pretty good job.
Yeah, just to kind of, again, using Con Ed as an example, where you've got such diverse load shapes on your different parts of your network, stuff like that, it probably wouldn't be a good thing to implement a time of use rate or a dynamic rate that had a fixed set of hours for your entire service territory. You need 6 to 10 in your residential areas, and you need noon to 6 in your commercial areas, and there's probably some parts in between that need a different block of hours and stuff like that. So you need that flexibility to kind of price in different parts of your network, which can kind of drive regulators kind of in a little bit of a frenzy, because they like everybody's got to be treated the same and stuff like that. But my advice to the regulators is get over that. If you want to achieve the right benefits from what you're trying to achieve here in New York, you got to kind of enable the consumers, and not every consumer is the same, and not every part of your network is the same. So the economics should drive what you're doing.
One of the key goals of REV process is to integrate more distributed energy resources and renewables. Can you talk a little bit about the impact of the pricing you had on renewable energy and DERs?
Yeah, in SMUD, that wasn't part of the game that they were playing, but we've evaluated PG&E's time-based pricing for quite a few years, both their dynamic rate and their time use rates, and it's very interesting in PG&E's service territory in Northern California. On their E6 time of use rate, which is a 3-period TOU rate, don't quote me on this, but something like 60 to 70% of the customers on that rate are net metered, and nearly all of them have PV on the roofs. And all the purveyors of photovoltaic systems and stuff, they love the time of use rate, and they sell that as part of their, to the customer. They talk about that a lot, and they get customers on it. There's a lot of EV customers on time use rates in PG&E service territory, although not as many as you might think. My feeling is probably the Tesla owners don't really worry about that stuff, but the Prius owners, or the Leafs, I'm sorry, probably do. So I do think that there is a important and complementary role of pricing in encouraging renewables. And again, another reason to kind of move in that direction, I think.
Just a brief comment. So we have PV customers on hourly pricing in Illinois. Right now, to calculate an accurate bill comparison, it's a manual calculation for those customers. We're not currently getting that second feed, so we don't know exactly how much they're producing unless we get that information from the utility on a one-off basis. But we've done research on a handful of customers, and their savings on the program have been even higher once we've gotten all the data from their systems. So I think, too, the way in Illinois, at least, is they're selling back at those market rates. So on those hot summer days or in those peak hours, they're selling back at those peak times, assuming they're generating more than they're actually consuming at those times.
Yeah, right now, we're certainly, we don't have the amount of sun that Phoenix has or California, but in Maryland right now, in our service territory, we have about 6,000 residential customers with rooftop solar, a number of large, I'll call them utility scale solar facilities also in the state. Again, one of the advantages of bringing back that voltage data from our smart meters, it actually is giving us a lot of insight into where we may have potential distribution problems that we wouldn't have known before. So we know that, okay, maybe there's this house there that has those two 19 kW. That one we would have picked up. But for those that are charging the Prius at a level 1 charger or a level 2 charger, it gives us insights so we can say, okay, we've got to do something on the distribution system. Maybe it's the local transformer. The same with photovoltaics. If you get, we found with EVs, they cluster. So if somebody comes home with a plug-in Prius, guess what? If they're on a court, there's more than likely there's going to be 2 or 3 plug-in Priuses on that court. We see the same with actually the solar installations. The rooftop solar, somebody puts a bunch of panels on their roof and says, oh, look how much I saved. They're at a cocktail party with their neighbors, and guess what? There's all of a sudden their neighbors are putting it in. So again, having this plethora of voltage data from every meter point on our system gives us a lot of insight to be able to better manage those intermittent resources that we may or may not know are going in. The small installations, they're supposed to contact us and let us know. It doesn't always happen. There's some do-it-yourselfers that might be putting PV on their own roof, and hopefully that doesn't happen, not supposed to happen, but again, it gives us a good place to look to say, okay, we may have to do something there just to make sure that court's not dark tomorrow night. So again, we think that's a plus for us.
We're almost out of time, so I have one more question, and this is to all speakers. Given all we have learned from pilots, demos, and programs across the U.S., what should we do or attempt to learn through innovative demonstration projects here in New York? I saved the hardest to the last.
Is it lunchtime?
Radio silence.
Steve, you're
Well, that's a tough one. And again, I hate to keep beating the same drum, but that'd be an easier question to answer if we had the metering platform in place, and there's a lot of things you could do to try to sort of see how to help this market develop. In the absence of it, I mean, some of the things the commissioner was talking about this morning, which I couldn't quite fully process, but, the idea of what the role of third parties and aggregators coming in and trying to somehow operate around a price signal. But I don't know how you get the price signals to the aggregators, again, without the metering. So, it's kind of like, it's good in concept, but, you can have parties coming in and offering load control. I mean, you can get demand reduction without the pricing. Con Ed does that. I'm sure many of the other utilities probably have some kinds of programs in place. There's a lot of different kinds of demand response. They've kind of got it all going in California, and there's a great empirical database. Although the humidity issues and things that you deal with are going to get different results in terms of the overall reduction. But there's a lot of empirical data around for other kinds of non-price-based demand response programs and what you can do with them and what kind of enrollment rates you might get and what customers will put up with in terms of the cycling strategies and things like that. So I think there's probably some things that you can do in that regard here in California, and I think that's one of the things that the REV is intended to drive. As my advice, whatever you do it in a way that you can measure what happened as a result. and that's, everybody said, yeah, obviously. That's not an easy thing to do. Doing sound evaluations of the impacts of your policies is a challenge to do in the real world. And you got to think that through. And you got to think multiple years as well. There was something we saw in the NYSERDA Clean Energy Fund presentation that they gave a while back about, I forget their term, but test, measure, adapt. That's a great philosophy. Our firm, when we advise our clients, we call it a test and learn strategy. But, don't think I'm going to design the best thing right out of the blocks and it's going to work for the next 10 years. Develop a strategy where you're trying different things, you're getting rid of the things that aren't working, you're improving the things that are working, and you're doing it in a way that you can measure the results of whatever policies you're implementing. That's my main advice, I think, in New York as you embark on this journey. And if you ask what happened after the fact, that can be a really hard question to answer. So think it through.
Again, I would be loath to recommend a specific going forward to any given utility, just knowing the differences in the utility. I do believe that though there's been a showing that smart meters, I think we're estimating there are about 50 million smart meters in the United States right now. Worldwide adoption, I've had visits over the last 2 years from Tokyo Electric, from China Power and Light, who are coming here. You're seeing developing nations now saying, okay, we want some of the benefits that we believe smart metering can bring. They think that'll help them do more energy efficiency, more peak load reductions, get some of the dirty generation off their system. So I really think that technology is proven. It's a pretty safe bet going forward. And then there's going to be things you can do. The one recommendation I always have is don't rush into it too quickly. Don't try to do too much too fast. If you need a billing system, make sure you get that up and running. I was the project manager for our billing system that we put in 25 years ago that's now been retired. It was the worst 4 years of my life. It's a tough job to get those up and running. AMI, it's going to take 4 or 5 years to do the deployment of that. So really, if you're going to do something, I think you got to start taking steps. But you can put an AMI without a billing system, but then you'll be somewhat limited in what you can do on your pricing options. But I still think it's going to be a plus in the long run. So that's probably where I'd probably be looking for first. And then make sure each step is well thought out, and you implement it so that the customer doesn't see something bad happen. You know, you don't want to roll out a new fancy pricing program and then find your billing system blows up and, you know, it's not doing it. So I would recommend maybe doing a pilot to test the technology to make sure you can actually build these things if that's what you're going to do. Don't try to do a whole system rollout at one time. Just kind of some lessons from my troubled past in doing things.
Yeah, I would just comment, I think there have been so many lessons learned from utilities and pilots and rollouts, and I think the communication, and I guess this would be maybe a question for the utilities here, but the communication between utilities on lessons learned and what worked for them, what didn't work, the successes and challenges. I think there's so much to learn within the industry if we actually allow access to those learnings within the utility industry. Again, that's not my industry, it's your industry, but you know, I think we've been a part of these pilots that have tried to figure out what's going to happen with these new rates and technologies, and holy smokes, we've learned a lot. I mean, just make sure there's the right certificate in the meter to get the right data that you need to do the right billing. There's a lot that needs to happen, and it's hard to just think of everything that could happen when you roll out these pilots. But I think right now, at this point in time, there have been so many pilots that there's a pretty decent catalog out there amongst the other utilities of lessons learned that I think, you know, hopefully we can all learn from.
Thank you. We certainly appreciate your presentation and your insights. We learned a lot, and I want to thank you to our panelists who asked questions too. So we're going to take a quick break for lunch, and we're going to start again at 12:15, 12:20.
Smoothies.
12:20, and I will see you back here.